Yesterday, I went to the dentist to have my lower teeth extracted, but I was told I needed an x-ray. A few days later, I went about my usual day when, out of the blue, my mother asked if I wanted to get the x-ray done that day. Naturally, I agreed, hoping to save some time. We found a mall with a dental clinic that could do the x-ray. The place seemed abandoned, though there was a friendly woman working there. She put a vest on me and led me to the room where the x-ray would be taken. Despite an eerie feeling about the place, I followed her without question. She instructed me to sit and bite down on a plastic object, which I did. Her last command was to close my eyes, so I complied. Little did I know, it was about to become the most traumatic experience of my life. The x-ray machine beeped, signaling it was moving into position and to wait for a few moments. A few minutes later, it was ready. As the laser crossed my face, I felt a burning sensation. Thinking it was normal, I stayed quiet until the laser passed again, and this time the pain was unbearable. I recoiled from the machine, rushing to the mirror, and was horrified by what I saw. My face had been skinned down to the bone and muscle. My mother screamed, but the woman who performed the x-ray stood there, smiling. Her smile was grotesque, stretching unnaturally from ear to ear, as if her mouth had been slit to create it. Blood dripped down my neck and clothes as she gazed at me with satisfaction, knowing exactly what she had done. After 3 months in the hospital recovering from the damage, I still live with the memory of that terrifying event. Sometimes, I wish I had said no to the x-ray, regretting every second of my decision, and wishing I could go back and undo it. It's been a few weeks since I left the hospital. My mother told me we had to visit that mall again, and the moment she mentioned it, I felt a chill down my spine and dread settled in. I asked her why we needed to go to that awful mall, and I felt relieved when she said it was just for groceries. I got ready, and we left. Normally, my mother is quite talkative, but on the drive, she was silent. We usually have long conversations, but now, she wouldn't speak. I started feeling anxious and tapped her on the shoulder. To my shock, she grabbed my hand quickly, her grip unnatural. In a deep, almost demonic voice, she told me not to touch her. She continued driving in silence. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the mall. When I stepped out of the car, my mother grabbed my wrist forcefully and demanded I follow her in that same cold, eerie tone. I panicked as we neared the same dentist's office. It was the same woman, the one I had thought was friendly before. They strapped me to a bed, and as I struggled in fear, trying to break free, it was too late. The laser moved across my entire body this time, not just my face. It felt like I was burning alive. The pain lasted for what felt like 3 or 4 minutes. By then, I was close to death from blood loss and having my skin stripped away. I lay there helpless, staring at my mother and the woman. Their eyes were gone, replaced by empty black holes, as if their sockets had turned into voids. They both grinned at me with that same inhuman, terrifying smile. Blood pooled on the bed and my body, and I cried, the tears feeling like molten lava as they burned my skin. I couldn't endure it any longer. I grabbed my hunting knife, the one I carry for self-defense, and stabbed myself. That moment still lingers in my mind. I was a 19-year-old girl named Audrey Connor, living in California with my family. I had 2 brothers and loving parents when it all happened. Now I'm 27, living in Yorkshire, England, but the memory haunts me daily. I've told my parents, but they don't believe me, even though the police found a case matching the exact event, with the exact woman's name. That case remains unsolved after 2 years. The details of that day are forever etched in my mind, and it's a memory I wish I could erase. No one believes me when I try to explain what happened. If this had happened at any other point in recent history, during any other week, the phenomenon would have dominated the news. Scientists would have been baffled, and panic would have swept across the globe. But the phenomenon started making headlines alongside the unsettling news that it might be possible none of it would matter anymore. Ever. I didn't want to read that headline. Instead, I focused on learning everything I could about the phenomenon, as it was most commonly known. There were other names for it too: ghost rooms, doubling, and the eeriest of them all, the other side. Whatever the name, it was the same worldwide, and it was spreading rapidly. Suddenly, people everywhere began noticing that walls were crumbling in their older buildings. It seemed that the doubling could only happen in older spaces, places that had age and history. The other key element was that these places had to be out of the way: closets, basements, bathrooms. A wall might crumble in a closet or flood in a basement, and when it fell, behind it would appear a mostly empty but identical replica of the room. It was always in older places, and rational voices in the media tried to explain it. Perhaps previous generations had constructed hidden rooms during the Cold War in preparation for the impending doom of nuclear war. I couldn't help but feel envious of our parents and grandparents, who only had to fear the threat of nuclear destruction. But the voices on message boards, YouTubers, and the wider internet community didn't buy that explanation. Those with the time and inclination to look deeper, a small fraction of the world, quickly debunked it. The secret rooms had carpets that matched renovations done just a few years ago. They had paint or wallpaper selections that were fresh in people's memories, sometimes even the exact same as the current decor. Occasionally, children's toys or old clothes in closets would have an identical pair on the other side. It seemed clear to me that whatever was happening couldn't be explained logically, and it comforted me to know I wasn't the only one thinking this. Something so obviously supernatural, so visible, made me believe that maybe there was a higher power watching over us. It made me wonder if perhaps he was coming to save us all. My apartment and all the places my friends lived in were too new to witness the phenomenon firsthand, so we did what anyone would in such strange, uncertain times. We went out drinking. We hit all our usual spots. Some of us had work the next day, but none of us planned on going home anytime soon. The first two bars didn't have it. They were either not old enough or not eerie enough, whatever the criteria were. The third bar had been shut down, with a note that read, "Thanks for everything." We had a good run. But the fourth bar, that one was different. It was packed. The bartender was handing out drinks for free, indulging in her share as well. As soon as we entered, she poured us a round of shots, slurring cheerfully, "To the end of the world." At this bar, the phenomenon had manifested in the ladies' bathroom, and we waited our turn to see it for ourselves. Despite everyone drinking like it was their last night, we all grew quiet as we neared, in silent awe of the strange occurrence. The group ahead of us exited, and a girl made the sign of the cross as a boy held the graffiti-streaked door open, wishing us luck as we stepped inside. The back wall was gone. Someone on the staff had cleaned up the debris and removed any crumbling drywall. The transition into the secret room was tidy, yet distinct, as it was still painted the bright pink that the bathroom had been 3 years ago, before they had switched to turquoise. I'd been in that bathroom a few times, usually because I was drunk or avoiding a mess in the men's room. I vividly remembered reading graffiti in the back of one of the stalls while desperately trying to keep my stomach intact. Black Sharpie over Barbie pink paint. It was burned into my memory. This new room had some graffiti too, but much less than before, and a few band stickers. This wasn't some Cold War-era hidden space, nor was it an exact replica of the old bathroom. No, this was something entirely different. The bathroom only had 3 stalls, so the ghost room wasn't large, but my friends inspected every inch of the graffiti. The girls swore they recognized some of it, while the guys tried to lighten the mood by reading off some of the sillier markings. I went over to the sink to see if the water worked. I turned the tap and heard creaking and grumbling, but nothing came out. I wiped the grime off the mirror and stared at my reflection. I had been wearing my old cross necklace lately, the one I kept for occasions like this. I hated how it looked on me, but considering everything happening, I figured it couldn't hurt to hedge my bets. My friends, some of whom I had only met days earlier at other bars, had grown silent, struck by the mystery before us. Cindy finally broke the silence. I watched her point to a childlike drawing of a dog in the mirror, an arrow pointing to it with the word dog written underneath. "I drew this," Cindy said, 5 years ago, while Stevie was fixing her eyeliner. That was the moment. The proof in my mind that whatever was happening was supernatural. There was something bigger than us, something out there. And that realization made me angry. I punched the mirror in front of me, and at last, the tap began to flow. As shards of glass fell into the sink, the blood from my hand mixed with the fresh red water pouring from the faucet. For some reason, I cupped my hands under the red liquid and drank. It tasted like blood, but also the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. I closed my eyes, savoring it, and when I opened them again, I was somewhere new, or rather, somewhere old. I was still wearing my stained jeans and boots, my hands and mouth still red and wet. But somehow, I had been transported to the backyard of my childhood home. It was sunny, warm, and it looked exactly the way it had when I was very young. The paint was still fresh, the trees small. And most impossibly of all, waiting for me on the back steps was my childhood dog, Frog. A small black lab with white socks and a notch in his right ear. Though I knew it couldn't really be Frog, because he was off his leash, not running around like a maniac, and his gray beard was gone. He looked young, though I knew he had died over a decade ago. Then he spoke to me, not with his mouth, but with his thoughts directly in my mind.
"We don't have much time," he said.
He walked over to me, moving with purpose despite his youthful form. "I need to get you ready for what's coming." He motioned for me to follow. "Walk with me." We both knew the way. We headed back towards the old gray shed, where Frog had once peed on vines or searched for bees in the summer. But the beehive was gone. In fact, there were only a few insects buzzing around, a lack of birdsong, and only occasional cries in the distance. Frog pawed at the flowers and vines behind the shed to reveal a tiny black and white kitten. I recognized it immediately. It had been years. When I was just 20, learning to drive, the kitten had run out in front of me. I had gotten out of the car, hoping I hadn't hit it, but I had. I'd always wondered who the kitten had belonged to, how it had ended up alone on the road. I patted it on the head, relieved to see it intact in this strange place. "In this place," Frog said, "are every creature you've ever killed." I didn't know how to respond, so I kept walking and listening, as I had always done in stressful or unfamiliar situations. Frog led me to the brush, where the woods began. "There are 14 birds, 2 possums, a handful of mice, and another cat in there. Those are just the roadkill. You don't remember them all, do you?" he asked. "No," I replied, following him into the trees. He nudged a patch of grass, revealing a nest of baby bunnies. I winced, remembering a lawnmower accident from when I was 10. "You don't think about the bugs, the mice, or the fish in the creek, do you? They were easy to forget, right?" Frog asked. "They were," I said. "Are all of them here?" "All of them," Frog replied. We continued walking along the game trail towards the creek, sunlight filtering through the trees. Birds fluttered in the branches, worms surfaced from the ground, and ants scurried along the path behind us. The kitten, bunnies, and a small army of animals began to follow us. "You're here too," I said. It felt wrong to pet Frog now that he had this new presence, but I couldn't resist. I leaned down to pat him, which turned into hugging him tightly and whispering, "I'm sorry," over and over again. And then, the memory came rushing back, the blood splatter, the guilt, the shame that lingered whenever I tried to sleep, or whenever anyone innocently asked about my childhood. I had to do it myself, you see. Frog had been sick, and my parents only believed in one kind of medicine. Good things do happen, and I mean really good things. It's a truth I've witnessed with my own eyes. However, people are also right when they say that if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Back in the 1960s, specifically in 1965, I faced my own challenges. In my part of the world, finding a place to call home was one of the hardest things to do. I was 23, optimistic, and full of hope for the future, even though I had been hopping from one place to another and was teetering on the edge of homelessness. So, when a seemingly perfect opportunity came my way, I could hardly believe it. A 2-bedroom house with a gorgeous garden and backyard, priced at what seemed like a joke. It was too good to be true, but I didn't have the luxury of turning it down. On the first night, urgently needing to relieve myself, I opened my eyes and saw a massive bug on my pillow, staring at me as if it was watching me sleep. I jumped up, knelt, and froze, unsure what to make of it. The bug didn't move, it was dead. A closer look revealed it was an unusually large flea, and I feared the worst. I hadn't just found a dream house to end up fighting a flea infestation, had I? I began scanning the bed, searching for other pests, preparing for the worst. There was an infestation, but not of fleas. What I was dealing with was far worse. The second night, again woken by the urge to urinate, I rose and headed toward the door. That's when I saw it. My body froze, my eyes widening as I tried to process what I was looking at, a hole in the wall next to the bedroom door. It wasn't large, but it was big enough to fit an eye, and that eye seemed to be staring right into me. I stayed frozen for what seemed like forever, unsure of what to do. I took a slow step toward it, and as I neared, the unimaginable happened. The eye blinked. My heart nearly stopped, and I stumbled backward in a panic. I rushed to my bed, crawled under it, and grabbed the baseball bat I had hidden there. I stood up, looked back at the hole, and saw that the eye was gone. The hole remained, but the eye had vanished. The next day, I patched up the hole, hoping that it had been some sort of hallucination because I had to keep my mind sharp for my job and I couldn't afford to go crazy. The third night, I woke with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. Something about the eye incident didn't sit right with me. I glanced at the wall where the hole had been, and it was still covered. But as I scanned the room for any signs of anything strange, my gaze landed on something unusual, a golden can sitting on my desk across the room. I stared at it, confused, because I certainly hadn't put it there. Slowly, I got up from the bed and moved toward it. As I looked down at my slippers, something caught my eye, a long, pale arm retreating under my bed. I ran out of the house, terrified, and went to Sam's place to ask for help. We called the police, but after an investigation, they found nothing. I was reminded to keep every door and window secure, especially at night. That night, before bed, I searched the house myself again, just in case. Everything seemed normal, except for a strange small tree in the backyard, a tree that hadn't been there before. It had bizarre red fruits, punctured with holes, and inside, seeds, reminding me of the eye. I decided to ignore it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The next morning, I noticed that the tree had vanished, and when I asked a colleague about it, she told me it was a yew. She didn't know anything about it, but it unnerved me even more. I tried to delay returning to that house, but eventually, I had no choice. The fourth night, after work, I walked into the kitchen and saw that the yew tree had returned to the backyard. Armed with a kitchen knife, I steeled myself for whatever awaited me upstairs. My heart pounded as I climbed the stairs, and midway up, I noticed a small toy car wheel on the stairs. I put it back and continued, but as I reached the top, I found another small object, this time a red die, placed carefully in front of my bedroom door. I didn't pick it up. When I entered the room, everything seemed normal. I sat down on my bed, drained by the madness of it all. Then a thought struck me. What about under the bed? I knelt and peeked under. I didn't see a smiling psychopath, but I did find something, a severed, partially decomposed human ear. My hands shook as I picked it up, and I fled to a motel that night. The next day at work, I could hardly focus, too consumed with thoughts of what to do. I decided I would leave that house. I just needed to figure out when. That evening, as I approached the house, a little voice interrupted my thoughts. It was Timmy, Sam's 6-year-old son, on his bike. He waved, and I waved back, but when I got to the door, he said, "He doesn't like those." "Who?" I asked, confused. "Rebus," he replied coldly. "Rebus?" I asked, baffled. "Don't you get it? He's been warning you all along," Timmy said, with a chilling look. I didn't understand, but before I could respond, Timmy pedaled off, calling out, "Good evening, Mr. Hayward." I couldn't make sense of it and tried to shake off the strange encounter. The fifth night, as I sat on my bed, the thought of fleeing consumed me. I couldn't stay there any longer. The events of the past nights replayed in my mind, and I finally understood. I can harm you.
It hit me.
I can harm you. And then the next sequence. You will die here. You will die here.
It was clear now.
I had to leave. I quickly packed a bag and rushed out of the house, but as I reached the living room, the yew tree was there, its roots breaking through the floor. A red fruit dropped from the tree, but when it landed near my foot, it wasn't a fruit. It was a black die. More followed, each one a die, confirming the message. It was time to flee or die. I bolted out through the back door and ran through the backyard, never to return. Months later, financially drained, I paid for the lease cancellation and lived from motel to motel or at friends' places. I never returned to that house or collected my belongings. The real estate agency claimed everything was fine, but I knew better. Eventually, I found a new job in another town, a new home, and my dream wife. But I still wonder, who or what was Rebus, as Timmy called it? I don't care to know. It had its own name, and Rebus was simply the name Timmy gave it because of how it communicated. There's some truly strange, terrifying things out there. Please, always be cautious. Hello, boys and ghouls. I've decided to put together a list that might help you avoid encountering an odd ghost or ghoul. Of course, mileage may vary, but I hope that through my own mistakes, you can learn a few valuable lessons. Rule 1. Never go to the bathroom alone in a new place, especially if you feel like something's off. Bathrooms, as you know, are creepy, right? I've heard many stories where people have had close encounters or nearly faced spirits. One of my teachers once shared a story with me. She told me that one day, she had to stay late at school. While in the bathroom, she heard the door to the stall next to hers opening and slamming shut repeatedly. When she went into her own stall, the other one was empty. But as soon as she sat down, the door started slamming again. Bravely, she told it to stop, and surprisingly it did. She later came out to find that no one was around. Another time, my family took a trip to India. On our last night, my grandmother woke up to the sound of the bathroom door handle turning, as if someone were trying to open it. She thought it was either me or my mom who had gotten stuck in there and was about to open the door for us. But when she looked over, she saw that we were both lying beside her. It seemed that something was trying to enter the room from the bathroom, but whatever it was, it couldn't get through. My friend once told me a story that relates to this. While traveling, he stayed at a hotel that had rooms with large bathtubs. Being someone who enjoys a good soak, he decided to take full advantage of it. After a late project meeting, he decided to relax in the tub. As he was about to get out, he felt something grab his ankle, pulling him back into the water. He managed to yank his ankle free, get out of the tub, and rush back into his room without breaking his neck. After the water drained, he couldn't help but wonder what had tugged at his ankle. The tub was empty, with nothing strong enough to pull him back in. However, there was a thumbprint on his ankle. Believe me when I say, he didn't use a tub for quite a while after that. So, my friends, learn from my mini-stories. Bathrooms seem to be a favorite haunt for spirits. Why that is, well, I'll leave that to people smarter than I am to figure out. In any case, never go to the bathroom alone, especially at night, in public places. If you must, make it quick. You definitely don't want to meet any spirits. The time on Sonia's dashboard blinked 10:45, casting a blue glow over her trembling fingers. She slowly parked her car next to a picnic table, its weathered brown wood bathed in moonlight. Just as planned, she'd arrived at the meeting spot on the east side of Maplewood Park's parking lot and let her gaze wander randomly over the shadowy grounds until she spotted him. Beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient oak, a figure stood waiting. The moonlight sculpted his silhouette like a paper cutout against the night sky. Sonia's heart wasn't just beating, it was leaping in her chest like a caged bird. The same way it always did during late-night chats with Klaus. The Starsky social media platform had become their secret haven, where countless late-night talks unfolded under the glow of their phone screens. But tonight was different. The virtual world was about to meet reality, and somewhere deep in her mind, a tiny voice whispered that everything was about to change. As she stepped out of the car, a wave of dizziness washed over her, forcing her to steady herself against the cool metal frame. Her mind raced. Had she forgotten her meds? She fumbled through her pocket with shaking fingers until they brushed against a familiar plastic bottle. A wave of relief rushed over her as she retrieved it. Yet that relief quickly soured as she tilted the bottle, watching the last pill tumble into her palm. The thought of an empty pill bottle nagged at her, and she made a mental note to ask her mom about getting a refill in the morning. With practiced ease, she flicked her wrist to pop the pill into her mouth, a motion she'd perfected over time. But tonight was different. Her usual flawless coordination faltered, whether from the dizzying lightheadedness or the electric nervousness that tingled in her veins at the thought of meeting Klaus in person. The moment stretched like honey dripping from a spoon, and she watched in slow motion as the pill slipped away. It rebounded off the side of her mouth and fell to the pavement, vanishing into the sewer drain. She stared at the grate, then shifted her gaze to the moon's calm glow. Taking a deep breath, she whispered a silent prayer that everything would be okay. He emerged from the shadows, walking toward her with purpose. The street lamp's bright light revealed a pale boy who, like her, was 17. His dark brown eyes held a hint of mystery, and a messy crop of dark hair partially covered his right eye. The photos only captured half of his allure. He flashed a dazzling smile, one that could easily make any top 10 list of the most stunning smiles. Sonia felt the unmistakable pull of attraction. Her pulse quickened, but she steadied herself with deep breaths. "Hey, I'm glad you could make it," Klaus said, nodding as he walked toward the picnic table. "Hi, yeah, me too," she replied nervously, sitting down across from him. There was something disarming about his relaxed charm, but underneath, like a shadow in the corner of her eye, she sensed something strange in his movements, as if he existed on a frequency slightly out of sync with the world. Sonia felt the warning prickle at the back of her neck. Still, she pushed the feeling aside, telling herself she was just being paranoid. After all, he was handsome enough to make anyone nervous. "So, listen. I need to tell you something." He slid into the seat next to her, his right arm casually resting across the back of the table behind her, close but not touching. His cologne enveloped her like an invisible mist, dark, dangerous, and perfect. Her heart stuttered in her chest as she inhaled the intoxicating scent, feeling dizzy. Without warning, her leg began its telltale bounce, her nervous tic that always betrayed her. Heat flooded her cheeks as she pressed her palm to her thigh, willing herself to calm down. In this charged moment, she waited for whatever he would say next. As if distracted, he paused before speaking again. "Look, I wasn't being honest before." His voice deepened, smooth and seductive, like the taste of Belgian chocolate on her tongue, soft, sweet, and impossible to resist. It sent delicious shivers through her body. "Really? What's that?" Her voice cracked, and she quickly cleared her throat to disguise the pitch. Inside, she felt like a leaf trembling in the wind. She braced herself. "I'm not really who I said I was." A mischievous grin tugged at the corners of his mouth. His eyes shifted. Shadows of dark secrets danced like flames in their depths. Veins appeared beneath his skin, and around his mouth, his lips curled into a snarl. Sharp incisors elongated like daggers beneath his lip. Sonia slid to the ground, trembling with fear and awe. The dizziness hit harder now, accompanied by a sharp, pulling sensation inside her body. She collapsed. The world spun out of control, turning dark, but the sound of wicked laughter dragged her back to reality. "This was too easy, you know."
He laughed.
His image flickered in and out of focus. She looked down at the black boots, a foot from her head, spaced shoulder-width apart. "I must say, I'm a little disappointed." He crouched beside her, clasping his hands. "You're not even trying to run." Her lack of resistance seemed to drain his excitement. "Is something wrong?" Klaus eyed her like a predator studying its prey. She lay still, but he could sense the trembling beneath her hoodie. It wasn't cold tonight. He glanced down at her huddled form, realizing the hunt wouldn't be as fun if she couldn't stay conscious long enough to enjoy the pain he had in store. "All right, have it your way." He brushed her hair aside, lightly grazing her skin. It was burning hot. His breath caught in his throat as recognition hit him. "Werewolf," he whispered, awe and disbelief in his voice. He pulled back, startled. "But that's impossible. You're extinct." He recoiled, his dark hair falling across his face. Her deep rumbling growl rose in her chest. Clawed hands shot up, locking around his neck in a vice-like grip, then tossing him several feet through the air into the trunk of a maple tree, impaling him on a branch like a wooden stake. Leaves scattered everywhere. He shook his head, struggling to regain his balance, his bloodied hand clutching the branch piercing his abdomen. Without hesitation, she sprang to her feet, completing her transformation. The sickening slurping and sucking sounds, like thick stew boiling over, made his stomach churn. He watched in morbid fascination, unable to look away. Low guttural sounds rumbled in her throat as her wild eyes pierced his, striking fear into him, a fear he hadn't felt in all his 100 years as a vampire. Her jowls rippled, pulling back over razor-sharp teeth. With a deep growl, her jaw snapped, sending saliva splattering over his black cashmere sweater. He snarled, looking reproachfully at the ruined fabric. "You tramp! Look what you did to my sweater!" His fangs extended further, and in a sudden fury, he snapped and clawed at her. Underscore, 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 underscore. Crimson liquid soaked the earth, but nature would soon cleanse it. Storm clouds gathered overhead, ready to wash away not just the blood, but the sins of mortals. The air crackled with the peculiar energy that always preceded a storm, as if the sky itself held its breath in anticipation. Underscore, 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 underscore. Exhausted, she drove to Woodsville Cemetery in the early hours of the morning to bury the vampire's remains, wearing only a torn slip and a coat. Her face and hair were streaked with dried blood and dirt, but her mind was too overloaded with thoughts to care. The clouds thickened overhead as the first raindrops splattered against her windshield, but she hardly noticed as she drove. By the time she arrived home, the rain had turned into a downpour. She slipped her jacket over her head and ran around the house to enter through the back door. Pausing at the threshold, she listened, but the house was silent and still. She scanned the small kitchen, her eyes falling on a paper propped up on the table, half folded with scrawled handwriting. She grabbed it and read, "Hey, honey. This morning, we're visiting Grandma and Grandpa at the cabin. We picked up our prescriptions. Yours is on your dresser." I was jolted awake by the deafening screech of my headset speakers, and the guttural cry of a gunner echoed through them, resembling bells of doom. Dust ground between my teeth, and the vertebrae in my neck let out a stubborn pop as I twisted my head to gaze out the passenger side window of the semi-truck. A wave of shadows swept past, and dozens of hulking figures emerged from the trees a few hundred yards to my right, charging across the vast, overgrown pastureland. As the autumn sun waned in the cold gray sky, I barely made out the shine of grimy glass, reddish-brown mud splattered on dented metal, and rusted axles bent at odd angles, propelling the monstrous machines forward on all fours. There were over 20 of them, the herd larger than the last time, thanks to the abundance of abandoned scrap scattered throughout this forgotten stretch of the Appalachian foothills. At the rate they were advancing, they'd be upon us in minutes. Lieutenant Charlie McPherson, my 17-year-old driver and acting platoon sergeant, gripped the semi's steering wheel and looked at the oncoming horde, his face pale. "What's the call? Should we take a secondary road and run?" The crack in his voice revealed the sergeant's preferred course of action, and I couldn't blame him. Like most of my command, Charlie hadn't yet seen his 16th birthday and had spent most of the past few months in the safety of the Northern Military Zone. This was the first time our platoon had encountered so many anomalies at once, and I could feel the tension in the static over the radio. The fear was deep-rooted, a cold surge of adrenaline urging me to flee as quickly as the rattling vehicle beneath me would allow. but the others are counting on us. All hands, battle stations. I clicked the radio mic to make sure my voice carried across the convoy. We've got autostalkers at 3 o'clock. Stay on course, we're pushing through. Cries of alarm rang out from every vehicle, the signal sending every crew member into action. Diesel engines roared to life. Our speed increased, and drivers floored the gas pedal, sending black exhaust billowing into the sky. Machine guns rattled from their fortified positions on the trucks, but with a sinking feeling in my chest, I noticed how little effect it had on the enemy. These mutants were resilient, tough to take down with small arms, and easily panicked into a stampede like this one. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched them rumble closer, their hulking forms cutting through the foggy haze outside my window. The autostalkers, twisted hybrids of decayed cars and the breach's dark influence, charged like water buffalo on 4 axles, their tires flattened against the ground like hooves. Cars, trucks, vans, and buses all clattered forward, creaking and groaning, with no driver to be seen inside their moldy interiors. Loose rocks chipped at their paint, grass clogged their grills, and their headlights blazed with a wild gleam, driven by animalistic panic. I got to turn them away from the road. My eyes darted to the long flatbed trailers that made up our convoy, where the valuable cargo from today's raid was secured with chains and ropes. Since we'd been driven from our home in the New Wilderness Wildlife Reserve by a rocket barrage, all our efforts had focused on scavenging tools and equipment to replace what the missiles had destroyed. Arc welders, milling machines, metal lathes, anything that could help us recreate the wonders of the old world, we hoarded as if it were gold. This morning had delivered a treasure trove, a deserted tractor repair shop brimming with old-school, non-digital tools, perfectly preserved. It had taken the entire day to load them onto 4 salvaged lowboy trailers, and the slow, aging trucks pulling them were far from fast enough for a clean getaway. If the mutants reached us, they might overturn us with sheer force, and the last thing I would hear would be the screams of my crew over the radio. Call for backup and stay on course. Grabbing my Type 9 submachine gun from its spot next to my seat, I slapped Charlie on the shoulder and climbed through the truck's cab to the back, where the rear door opened onto the cargo deck. The wind hit me hard the moment I stepped outside, my brown braids snapping like a flag behind me, and for a split second, I froze in place, overwhelmed by a rush of sensations. Only months had passed since an ill-fated blogging trip brought me to the forgotten corners of Barron County, Ohio, but in moments like this, it felt like a lifetime. Sometimes, it was hard to believe the normal world I once knew still existed somewhere out there, oblivious to the fact that Ohio had once had an 89th county, a missing piece of the world now besieged by forces beyond comprehension. The breach had opened long before I arrived, spewing radiation and electromagnetic energy that twisted both natural and man-made creatures into horrific mutations. Amid this constant assault, our fragile modern systems collapsed, and nearly 3/4 of the civilian population was wiped out. Since then, new wilderness forces had fought to hold back the nightmare, all while locked in battle with Elsa, a shadowy group determined to seize control of the county. My days of shooting urban exploration videos and scrolling through social media were long gone. Now, I carried a submachine gun wherever I went and led ranger patrols through the overgrown wasteland that had once been rural countryside. It was a world I would never have believed in, yet here I was, and the memories flooded back in a whirl of wonder, anger, fear, pain, and determination.
Crash.
The trailer shuddered violently beneath my boots, snapping me back to the present. Drop the tire shields. My feet pounded across the deck as I ran to help the nearest crew member lower the heavy sheet steel plates into position. Our steps were unsteady as the trailer swayed. Each iron plate slid into its welded frame with a sharp clink, designed to protect our precious tires from attack, while brass cartridge casings began to spill onto the trailer bed as more Rangers opened fire. Gunners rushed back and forth, supplying ammunition to the machine gun mounts bolted onto the armored sides of the trailer, while grenadiers scrambled to their elevated positions, ready to launch explosives at the approaching mutants. Riflemen surged to the firing ports in the scrap metal parapets, bringing their small arms to bear, and I joined them. Aim for the legs. I cocked the bolt on my Type 9 and flicked the safety off, lining up a shot on the nearest autostalker, a green sedan. Hit their legs, drive them back. Brat-tat-tat-tat-tat. The gun bucked in my hands, the familiar recoil sending sparks flying across the mutant's sheet metal hide as the bullets raced toward its front left leg.
Hunk.
The fortress felt quieter now, the usual hum of activity muted, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of the recent events. My gaze shifted to a soldier standing nearby, and something within me urged me to act. "You," I called sharply. "Brad, come here." The soldier turned, confusion crossing his face. "My name is Arnold, sir," I scoffed, waving my hand dismissively. "No, it's Brad." He hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowing as if struggling to reconcile my words with his own identity. Then I noticed it, his expression softened, the confusion fading as his mind seemed to adjust. "Of course, sir," he said with a slight smile. "My mother always adored the name. That's why she named me Brad." The words sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't intended to change him, but it happened effortlessly, without resistance. "Good, Brad," I said, my voice tight as I struggled to maintain my composure. "I have a task for you." "Anything, my lord," he said, standing taller, already embracing his new name. I glanced down at the pipes on the floor, where I had dropped them. The sight of them stirred something deep within me, an undeniable weight. Slowly, I bent down and picked them up. The cool metal felt heavier now, more significant, as if they carried the burden of all I had done and all that lay ahead. I straightened up and turned to Brad. "Find me a priestess of Naama. I seek entrance to her palace." Brad hesitated briefly before nodding. "Yes, my lord." Right away. As he turned to carry out my command, I stood frozen in place, tightly gripping the pipes. My decision wasn't fully formed, but the words had slipped out before I could stop them. I needed answers. I needed to see her palace. I stood there in the dim hall, the pipes weighing heavily in my hand when the doors creaked open behind me. I turned to see Gregory and Tiana entering, their faces a mix of wariness and exhaustion. Gregory's usual confidence was tempered by tension, while Tiana's sharp gaze scanned the room, as if expecting a threat. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with unspoken tension, each of us carrying the weight of what had been left unsaid. "You've built quite the fortress," Gregory remarked, his voice laced with dry sarcasm. "Yeah," I replied flatly. "Didn't expect to see you two here. I thought you'd be done with me by now." Tiana's eyes flickered, a mixture of guilt and defensiveness crossing her face. "We didn't have a choice, Glenn. That thing in the forest, it was either leave you behind or let all of us be taken." "You didn't have a choice," I repeated, bitterness seeping into my voice. "That's the excuse you're going with." Gregory stepped forward, jaw clenched. "Look, you don't get it. We had to run. We barely made it out ourselves. If we'd stayed, you'd have ended up like me," I interrupted, voice rising. "A Leshy. Another monster wandering this damn world. Except I didn't stay. I fought. I clawed my way back. Alone." The words hung heavily in the air. Tiana took a step closer, her voice softer now. "We didn't know, Glenn. We thought you were gone. That there was no hope left. And what? Now you've changed your mind." I snapped, the bitterness spilling over. "You didn't care enough to stay, but now that I've built a fortress and an army, you come crawling back? That's not fair," Gregory said sharply. "You think we wanted to leave you? You think we didn't feel like cowards for it? You think it didn't tear us apart?" I opened my mouth to retort, but the pain in his eyes stopped me. There was real anguish there, raw and unshielded. "We've been looking for a way to fix things ever since," Tiana said quietly. "We've risked everything trying to find you, trying to make it right." I looked between them, my anger faltering as their words sank in. "You've been looking for me?" I asked, voice softening. "Of course we have," Gregory replied, shoulders sagging. "We couldn't just leave things like that. We knew we'd done wrong, but we thought maybe we could make up for it." Frustration still simmered, but it had begun to fade. I ran a hand through my hair, the pipes cool in my grip. I was angry. I confessed after a long silence, voice low.
I still am.
But I understand. I know what this place does to people. And I can't blame you for running when I might have done the same. Tiana stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. We didn't come here to fight, Glenn. We came to help. If you'll let us. I sighed, turning back to face them. So what now? You expect me to just forgive and forget? No, Gregory replied firmly. But we can start over. Work together like we did before. Maybe this time we'll actually get out. I stared at him for a long moment, the anger and betrayal still lingering at the edges of my mind. But beneath it all, there was something else, relief. Relief that I wasn't alone anymore. Fine, I said at last, voice steady. But don't expect me to forget overnight. You left me behind. That's not something I'll forget easily. We wouldn't expect you to, Tiana said, her voice soft but firm. But we'll prove ourselves to you. No matter how long it takes. A quiet settled between us, uncomfortable, but no longer hostile. I glanced at the pipes in my hand, their weight a little lighter now. Then I turned back to Gregory and Tiana, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. So, I said, breaking the silence. You guys want to get out of here? Gregory grinned, and Tiana nodded, determination in her eyes. Let's do it, Gregory said. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we had a chance. Finally, Brad returned, leading a robed figure into the chamber. The priestess of Naama stood before us, her presence commanding yet serene. Her crimson robes shimmered faintly, and her piercing gaze carried a disturbing blend of devotion and attachment. I wasted no time. Using the same method that had bent the reality of this world to my will, I began to speak. My voice was calm, deliberate, weaving a narrative that tugged at her loyalty. I praised her wisdom, insight, and devotion, subtly suggesting that she had already seen the cracks in Naama's supposed paradise. I told her that her true purpose was not to serve Naama, but something far greater. Her stoic expression faltered. I saw the shift, her confidence wavered, then broke entirely, her eyes lighting up with the fervor of someone who believed they had found a higher truth. Of course, she whispered, bowing her head. You are right. I will serve you. I glanced at Gregory and Tiana. The shock on their faces was almost comical. Gregory leaned in, murmuring under his breath. That must have been how Henry did it. I straightened, facing the priestess. Tell us how to reach Naama's palace. Her explanation was both chilling and detailed, describing the trials and webs of deception surrounding Naama's domain. But one thing was clear. We wouldn't slip in unnoticed. When she finished, I stood still, processing her words. Then it hit me.
We'll meet an army, I said.
Tiana crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. You have one. But they're NPCs, Naama could rewrite them with a thought. I hesitated, the truth of her words sinking in. But then, an idea struck me. No, I said, turning toward the door. Not if I make them more. The courtyard was crowded. Every soldier, every warrior, every person loyal to the fortress stood at attention before me. Hundreds of them, their weapons gleaming and faces blank with unquestioning obedience. I climbed the steps to the central platform, Gregory and Tiana following behind. Gregory's expression was doubtful, while Tiana remained silent, her sharp gaze unwavering. At the top, I turned to face the crowd. I poured everything into my words, speaking of freedom, purpose, and the strength within them. I spoke of the battle ahead, the reason it mattered, not just for us but for the world. The speech came from a deeper place than I expected, filled with raw conviction and hope. I ended with a call to arms, demanding not only their loyalty but their belief. When I finished, the courtyard was still, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Gregory leaned in, his voice low. Good speech. But it doesn't solve the problem that they're NPCs. They'll do what they're told. Nothing more.
I didn't respond.
Instead, I drew the pipes from my belt. Gregory stiffened, his eyes widening. Glenn. I raised the pipes to my lips and began to play. The melody flowed from me, a a song of hope, purpose, and freedom. Each note reflected what I wanted for them, not just soldiers, but people with the power to choose. The sound filled the courtyard, weaving through the crowd. I closed my eyes, trusting. They're here, right here with me, right now. What should I do? Should I look at him? Should I see him? The man in the corner? Should I listen to her? Should I let her touch me? She loves to feel. She loves to touch. He loves to scream and speak, yet he never makes a sound. But damn it, she does. They only need to look at each other. Whatever he desires, she will speak for him in that horrifying voice. It's terrifying, revolting, but somehow beautiful. They've been here for so long now. I've grown used to them. I see them every single
Day.
Not a day goes by without hearing from them. They hide in the vents, the shower, the oven, anywhere they can squeeze into. It feels like they watch over me, making me feel safe and uncomfortable all at once. Just the other day, I found out that he can speak. They didn't know I was there, but I heard him, and since then, I haven't been able to sleep. His voice sounds so familiar, but I've never heard it before. I think they realized I was there when I walked away, because she suddenly started screaming and ran toward the door on all fours. All four of her long, skinny limbs. Her legs were longer than her torso. Her arms were even longer, dragging on the floor when she moved, and they could reach me from across the room if she wanted to. He went silent again, and I haven't heard him since that night. The discomforts I endured during that time were awful. I got sick, and I even got lice. I get lice often. I think they have it too. I see them scratching their heads a lot, and sometimes large, wet chunks of skin appear on my floor, and I'm forced to clean it up. If I don't, I fear something bad will happen. The longer it stays, the closer she gets. She sometimes stands at the foot of my bed, watching me, but she never does anything too extreme. Last night, I noticed something different about her. Her eyes were pitch black, and her mouth had been tied into this horrifying smile. By tied, I mean string was looped through her eye sockets, going under her skin as though pulled by a needle, keeping her pale, flabby cheeks stretched wide. Her tongue was long, purple, and had chunks missing. He doesn't have a tongue. His mouth is just a void. But there's something in that void, something big and disturbing. Like a head. A child's head. Bald, with lips pulled into a smile like hers. Today, she grabbed me when I tried to leave. She yanked me back inside through the front door violently.
She spoke to me.
Told me not to leave, or terrible things would happen.
I started to get scared again.
I felt that if I stayed, even worse things would happen, so I managed to wriggle out of her grip and ran for the door. I didn't have a car as I was struggling to make rent, so I walked to work. Everyone stared at me, horrified. I even waved to my neighbor, Isa, someone I thought was a close friend. She screamed and vomited, and I pulled my hand back from the wave. And then nothing. I woke up in a hospital, in a straitjacket. I was confused, but soon a doctor came in and asked me about what I remembered after leaving home for work. The only thing I remembered was waving to Isa. Or at least I thought she was my friend. I would never scream at a friend and make them vomit. The doctor told me what happened next. I hadn't fainted. I'd gone on a rampage, running through the neighborhood, screaming and yelling at random people. I had even ripped out most of my hair. I attacked Isa. She's gone now. I did that. The police searched my house after someone called them. They found 3 bodies, a man, a woman, and a baby boy. The woman's mouth was tied into a smile, and the man's was a frown. The baby's head was decapitated, not cut off, but twisted and ripped from his body. The boy's head was stuffed into the man's mouth, and his body was shoved into the freezer. Their bodies were mangled. Their scalps had been ripped off. All the bones in their arms and legs had been dislocated, and their skin stretched to its limits. They'd been dead for about 4 months. 4 months ago, this all started. 4 months ago, I killed my parents and my brother. And just today, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia and a psychopathic personality. I was charged with 3 counts of murder and will spend the rest of my life in this damn asylum. It all started because of Jasmine. She's one of those people who walks into a room and suddenly, All other sounds seemed to fade into the background. It's not just her looks, though she's undeniably beautiful. It's how she speaks, like each word pulls you closer into her orbit. I first met her 2 months ago at a party where she was chatting with a small group about how the planets would soon align in a certain way. And like an idiot, the first thing I blurted out to her was, "Astrology's not real, you know." She laughed, thankfully. Not in a mean way, more like she found my ignorance amusing. "Of course you'd say that," she said with a grin. "What's your sign?" "My what?" "Your zodiac sign." Virgo." Her smile widened, like she had me all figured out. "That makes sense. Virgos are skeptics." We spent the rest of the night talking with the group about the upcoming election, fate, and some seriously deep topics. At the end of the night, she leaned in and whispered, "I'm a Pisces, which means we could have a lot of fun together." My face turned bright red, and she handed me her phone, with a new contact already pulled up. Smooth. She was smooth in ways I could never be. That was my introduction to Jasmine and to her obsession with astrology. Charts, horoscopes, moon signs, everything. We kept texting about how the stars influence everything in life, relationships, decisions, and even the future. I thought it was total nonsense. But Jasmine? She believed in it like it was the gospel. And for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I didn't see her again until the following week when she invited me to a star reading party she was hosting. It sounded like something out of a cult meeting, but I showed up anyway. Well, because Jasmine. Her apartment was filled with candles, crystals, and people discussing retrogrades like they were breaking news. I felt totally out of place. But then Jasmine came over, grabbed my hand, and pulled me to the couch. "Let me read your chart," she said, entering my birth details into her astrology app. "Let's see what the stars have to say about Jeff Lowe." The fortress felt quieter now, the usual hum of activity muted, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of the recent events. My gaze shifted to a soldier standing nearby, and something within me urged me to act. "You," I called sharply. "Brad, come here." The soldier turned, confusion crossing his face. "My name is Arnold, sir." I scoffed, waving my hand dismissively. "No, it's Brad." He hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowing as if struggling to reconcile my words with his own identity. Then I noticed it. His expression softened, the confusion fading as his mind seemed to adjust. "Of course, sir," he said with a slight smile. "My mother always adored the name. That's why she named me Brad." The words sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't intended to change him, but it happened effortlessly, without resistance. "Good, Brad," I said, my voice tight as I struggled to maintain my composure. "I have a task for you." "Anything, my lord," he said, standing taller, already embracing his new name. I glanced down at the pipes on the floor, where I had dropped them. The sight of them stirred something deep within me, an undeniable weight. Slowly, I bent down and picked them up. The cool metal felt heavier now, more significant, as if they carried the burden of all I had done and all that lay ahead. I straightened up and turned to Brad. "Find me a priestess of Naama. I seek entrance to her palace." Brad hesitated briefly before nodding. "Yes, my lord. Right away." As he turned to carry out my command, I stood frozen in place, tightly gripping the pipes. My decision wasn't fully formed, but the words had slipped out before I could stop them. I needed answers. I needed to see her palace. I stood there in the dim hall, the pipes weighing heavily in my hand when the doors creaked open behind me. I turned to see Gregory and Tiana entering, their faces a mix of wariness and exhaustion. Gregory's usual confidence was tempered by tension, while Tiana's sharp gaze scanned the room, as if expecting a threat. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with unspoken tension, each of us carrying the weight of what had been left unsaid. "You've built quite the fortress," Gregory remarked, his voice laced with dry sarcasm. "Yeah," I replied flatly. "Didn't expect to see you two here. I thought you'd be done with me by now." Tiana's eyes flickered, a mixture of guilt and defensiveness crossing her face. "We didn't have a choice, Glenn. That thing in the forest, it was either leave you behind or let all of us be taken. You didn't have a choice, I repeated, bitterness seeping into my voice. That's the excuse you're going with. Gregory stepped forward, jaw clenched. Look, you don't get it. We had to run. We barely made it out ourselves. If we'd stayed, you'd have ended up like me, I interrupted, voice rising. A leshy. Another monster wandering this damn world. Except I didn't stay. I fought. I clawed my way back. Alone. The words hung heavily in the air. Tiana took a step closer, her voice softer now. We didn't know, Glenn. We thought you were gone. That there was no hope left. And what? Now you've changed your mind. I snapped, the bitterness spilling over. You didn't care enough to stay, but now that I've built a fortress and an army, you come crawling back? That's not fair, Gregory said sharply. You think we wanted to leave you? You think we didn't feel like cowards for it? You think it didn't tear us apart? I opened my mouth to retort, but the pain in his eyes stopped me. There was real anguish there, raw and unshielded. We've been looking for a way to fix things ever since, Tiana said quietly. We've risked everything trying to find you, trying to make it right. I looked between them, my anger faltering as their words sank in. You've been looking for me? I asked, voice softening. Of course we have, Gregory replied, shoulders sagging. We couldn't just leave things like that. We knew we'd done wrong, but we thought maybe we could make up for it. Frustration still simmered, but it had begun to fade. I ran a hand through my hair, the pipes cool in my grip. I was angry, I confessed after a long silence, voice low. I still am. But I understand. I know what this place does to people. And I can't blame you for running when I might have done the same. Tiana stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. We didn't come here to fight, Glenn. We came to help. If you'll let us. I sighed, turning back to face them. So what now? You expect me to just forgive and forget? No, Gregory replied firmly. But we can start over. Work together like we did before. Maybe this time we'll actually get out. I stared at him for a long moment, the anger and betrayal still lingering at the edges of my mind. But beneath it all, there was something else, relief. Relief that I wasn't alone anymore. Fine, I said at last, voice steady. But don't expect me to forget overnight. You left me behind. That's not something I'll forget easily. We wouldn't expect you to, Tiana said, her voice soft but firm. But we'll prove ourselves to you. No matter how long it takes. A quiet settled between us. Uncomfortable, but no longer hostile. I glanced at the pipes in my hand, their weight a little lighter now. Then I turned back to Gregory and Tiana, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. So, I said, breaking the silence. You guys want to get out of here? Gregory grinned, and Tiana nodded, determination in her eyes. Let's do it, Gregory said. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we had a chance. Finally, Brad returned, leading a robed figure into the chamber. The priestess of Naama stood before us, her presence commanding yet serene. Her crimson robes shimmered faintly, and her piercing gaze carried a disturbing blend of devotion and detachment. I wasted no time. Using the same method that had bent the reality of this world to my will, I began to speak. My voice was calm, deliberate, weaving a narrative that tugged at her loyalty. I praised her wisdom, insight, and devotion, subtly suggesting that she had already seen the cracks in Naama's supposed paradise. I told her that her true purpose was not to serve Naama, but something far greater. Her stoic expression faltered. I saw the shift, her confidence wavered, then broke entirely, her eyes lighting up with the fervor of someone who believed they had found a higher truth. Of course, she whispered, bowing her head. You are right. I will serve you. I glanced at Gregory and Tiana. The shock on their faces was almost comical. Gregory leaned in, murmuring under his breath. That must have been how Henry did it. I straightened, facing the priestess. Tell us how to reach Naama's palace. Her explanation was both chilling and detailed, describing the trials and webs of deception surrounding Naama's domain. But one thing was clear. We wouldn't slip in unnoticed. When she finished, I stood still, processing her words.
Then it hit me. We'll need an army, I said.
Tiana crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. You have one. But they're NPCs. Naima could rewrite them with a thought. I hesitated, the truth of her words sinking in. But then an idea struck me. No, I said, turning toward the door. Not if I make them more. The courtyard was crowded. Every soldier, every warrior, every person loyal to the fortress stood at attention before me. Hundreds of them, their weapons gleaming and faces blank with unquestioning obedience. I climbed the steps to the central platform, Gregory and Tiana following behind. Gregory's expression was doubtful, while Tiana remained silent, her sharp gaze unwavering. At the top, I turned to face the crowd. I poured everything into my words, speaking of freedom, purpose, and the strength within them. I spoke of the battle ahead, the reason it mattered, not just for us but for the world. The speech came from a deeper place than I expected, filled with raw conviction and hope. I ended with a call to arms, demanding not only their loyalty but their belief. When I finished, the courtyard was still, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Gregory leaned in, his voice low. Good speech. But it doesn't solve the problem that they're NPCs. They'll do what they're told. Nothing more. I didn't respond. Instead, I drew the pipes from my belt. Gregory stiffened, his eyes widening. Glenn, I raised the pipes to my lips and began to play. The melody flowed from me, a song of hope, purpose, and freedom. Each note reflected what I wanted for them, not just soldiers but people with the power to choose. The sound filled the courtyard, weaving through the crowd. I closed my eyes, trusting.